Want to make dungeon maps really quickly and really easily? Well, try using pixel art. Way back in the 8-bit era of video games, on consoles like the original Nintendo, artists used tiles to create the visuals for the games. They're little collections of pixel art that can be connected together, tiled to create backgrounds and characters and items in the game. And when we say stuff like an 8-bit aesthetic, that means typically an 8 by 8 pixel tile. Now, a lot of those old games added multiple tiles together to create 8 by 16 tiles or 16 by 16 tiles or even bigger. And actually all of these old gaming systems had all kinds of limitations like small screen resolution, limited color palettes, and of course minuscule amounts of memory. But all of those restrictions are what forced artists to get really creative with how they made artwork for these old games. And of course nowadays we don't have to be beholden to those restrictions, but it can be a really fun exercise and result in a really nostalgic aesthetic if you make something like a dungeon with all of those restrictions in mind. So I'm starting off my dungeon map by making just a few tiles. I've got wall tiles, corner, side, and floor tiles, and then a bunch of other elements that we'll be able to sprinkle in throughout the dungeon. Doors, stairs, keys, chests, and pots to smash. And also I'm trying to figure out how to make some cool looking water because this is going to be a sunken temple dungeon, like a water type dungeon. I'm making these 8-bit style dungeon tiles in Photoshop. Now there's lots of other programs that will make tiling these tiles later on a little bit easier, but I'm sticking with Photoshop right now because it's the program I'm most familiar with. I'm just using the pencil tool scaled all the way down to 1 pixel, and same with the eraser. The mode up at the top is set to pencil and then scaled all the way down to 1 pixel. And you can kind of see in the background that I've made a grid of 16 by 16 pixel wide tiles, just a checkerboard of dark gray and black. So I always have a reference for the 16 by 16 tile size I'm going for. And I've opted to go up to 16 by 16 instead of the typical 8 by 8, just so I can get a little bit more detail in the artwork. I just want to say there's something so fun about clicking around with a mouse, trying to create these individual elements out of little tiny square pixels. Making art like this feels more like trying to solve a little puzzle, trying to figure out how you can create a doorway or a tile of water that looks cool in a 16 by 16 grid. There's just something really fun about that process, and I really hope you give it a shot. Now I should also say for this dungeon map, I was very inspired by this egg bit tile set that I found on itch.io. It was created by Matt Glanville, and I'll have a link down in the description so you can check it out. If you don't want to draw your own individual elements, your own tiles, you can totally grab this set and use that instead to create your own dungeon. Now comes the really fun part. Once you're done building all of the individual tiles, or you've downloaded Matt's egg bit tile set, now it's time to start constructing the dungeon. I'm going to start by spreading out the floor tile and trying to just create a few rooms and connect them together with hallways. In Photoshop, I'm using the marquee selection tool to select the 16 by 16 floor tile, and then I'm just copying that over and over again. Once you have the tile selected, you can use the move tool and hold down Alt or Option and click and drag, and it'll make a copy of what you've selected. Like I said, this isn't quite as easy as some of the programs that are specifically designed for making pixel art, but at the same time, it's still way easier than drawing each floor tile individually. One thing to notice is that I left a pixel wide gap on the left and top side of this tile. That way when they're placed, there's a nice black line separating all of them. Now you might not find this totally necessary, especially if you are making tiles that are meant to connect and create a pattern, something like a wood floor tile pattern. But I like having these stone floor tiles separated individually because it makes a big grid that is kind of evocative of a tabletop role-playing game map. And that is exactly what I'm making this map for. I'm working on a tabletop role-playing game campaign called Asterlin Odyssey. It's inspired by the original Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games, and those games had these awesome 8-bit pixel dungeons filled with random encounters and simple little puzzles to solve. Those dungeons had really simple pixel art, but they were also stylish and colorful. And I just love the aesthetics of those old games, from the simple pixel art to the dorky writing and the whimsical monsters. So yeah, I'm kind of creating this stuff. I'm creating Asterlin Odyssey as my love letter to those old games in tabletop role-playing game form. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in checking out, the first issue of Asterlin Odyssey, the first of 3, is already available digitally on my Patreon. And if you sign up in this month, in March, you can get the second issue when it's released later this month. I've got a digital tier where you get the PDF, but I've also got a physical tier where I'm making actual booklets and sending them out to my patrons every month. And I'm putting a lot of effort into Asterlin Odyssey. I'm having a lot of fun making all of this pixel art for the game. So if you want to support the channel and get a fun 8-bit inspired adventure, definitely check out the Patreon, linked down in the description. Okay, now that all of the floor tiles and the water tiles have been laid out, it's time to start placing the walls. And this is just like the process has been going, just selecting the tile and copying it over and over again. I guess the walls are a little trickier because of this adjusted perspective. In the old Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games, the wall and floor tiles were all from the overhead perspective, very top-down, flat-looking. But for my map, I wanted to add a little bit of interest, do the sort of Zelda thing, and adjust the perspective a little bit. And again, I'm just really inspired by how Matt Glanville approached this different perspective in his tile set. And when I was placing the floor tiles, I tried to keep the walls in mind. The back and front wall tiles are the 16 by 16 pixels, but then the side tiles are 8 by 16 pixels. And really that just meant leaving some extra space in between the rooms so the wall tiles aren't overlapping or bumping into each other. As I'm laying out these walls, I also realized I needed an inside corner tile just to help make some of these connections work. And again, all of these tiles have that space left blank, the 1 pixel border on the left and top side. You know, it creates the nice black outline as you're tiling these things together. I guess technically the artwork only takes up 15 by 15 pixels, but I'm still treating it like a 16 by 16 tile when I'm placing it down. Now it's on to the fun part of placing down the unique elements, the doors and the treasure chests. I'm just deleting out some of the floor tiles and copying over these unique icons where I think they should go. It's really, really fun to make these unique tiles, and I can see myself going absolutely crazy making a whole bunch of different ones. But at the same time, I guess you don't really need to. Like, you could totally get away with just having 1 wall tile, 1 floor tile, and I guess a door tile. And you could totally just use those 3 tiles to make a huge sprawling dungeon if you wanted to. But I think adding in a few of these extra unique elements really does bring the dungeon to life. I probably should have made a few monsters and enemies to populate this dungeon, but that's going to be a video in the future. I've also decided to go back and add an extra highlight to the dungeon walls. I really wanted to keep these tiles very simple, but I tried it out and I was surprised at how much depth just a single pixel highlight added to these walls. It really makes them feel like they're elevated and higher up off of the floor tiles. Of course, once I made that addition, then I had to go and make all of the floor tiles unique, so I added a highlight and a bunch of scuff marks. It probably would have been much easier if I would have done this at the beginning when I was making the individual tiles. If I made like 4 or 5 or 6 unique floor tiles and then just copy and pasted those over and over again. So it still looked like there was a bunch of variety, but I wasn't going back and working on each floor tile individually. But you know, sometimes you just think of something that will make the drawing, the pixel art dungeon look cooler, and it's easier to go back at the end and just plow through it than it is to start the whole thing over again. And even with all that, this 7-room dungeon didn't take very long to make at all. And now that I have these tiles created, I can make an infinite number of dungeons. I can even swap out the colors, so instead of having a sunken water temple, I can have a sandy desert ruin or a dark and dirty castle dungeon. Let me know what you think of this dungeon down in the comments. I really hope this video inspired you to give making a pixel art dungeon a shot, whether it's for a video game or for your tabletop role-playing game or just for fun. It's really amazing what you can create just by making a few of these tiles and then copying them over and over again to make a cool dungeon. If you'd like to support the channel and get monthly TTRPG guidebooks and adventures like this 8-bit inspired Asterlin Odyssey campaign, please check out my Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!